Welcome to Background Checks on Contractors and the Contingent Workforce. I'm Mike Coffey, President of Imperative Information Group, and you've hopefully joined us before for some of our other webinars. But just real quick, just a quick reminder about who I am. I'm an HR guy. I've been in and around HR almost all of my career, and I spend a lot of my time consulting with employers around their selection issues and their employee relations issues. 17 years ago in January, we started the background screening firm that's now known as Imperative Information Group. And we've had a lot of opportunities to work with a lot of clients around their background check issues, both on the compliance side and just the practical side, concerns around what they should order and what kind of products would give them the kinds of information they need. I've had the privilege that a lot of my clients are a lot smarter than me, so a lot of what we talk about today are things that they've already figured out, and I'm just sharing with you. But I do want to put out there that you'll hear a certain amount of the gospel according to Coffey today, and what I mean by that is you're going to get a healthy dose of my opinion and the things that I've seen clients do successfully, but it doesn't mean that necessarily it's the right course for you to take in your organization. So I want you to go talk to your legal counsel. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm especially not your lawyer. So please, whatever you take away today, if it's different than what you're doing already, or if you think it's different than the advice you might have been given by your own legal counsel, go talk to them first. Especially, we've got employers from all over the country on the line today, and there are state by state and even municipality by municipality limitations on what employers can do these days. I don't know if you saw that Seattle City Council gave collective bargaining rights to Uber and Lyft drivers yesterday. So employment law is getting down to the local ordinance level now in a lot of places. So you want to make sure that whatever you do, you make sure it's appropriate in the areas where you're operating. So let's get started with this. First of all, when we're talking about contract and contingent workers, who are we talking about? Well, there's a whole bunch of different groups here. And first, as I'm talking about the employer who's bringing in these contractors or these temps, I'm going to call you, primarily I may call you the employer, but what I mean by that is the contracting organization. And then those organizations that are sending workers into your environment, I'm going to call those vendors primarily, just because there's so many different kinds that we'll talk about. Let's talk first about just temporaries or contingent staff. When I'm talking about these folks, I'm talking about temps who are brought in for short assignments, and they become like furniture. We don't even notice they're there. And some of them even have some longer-term assignments, and they come in and do their jobs, and they become like regular employees sometimes, which, as an HR pro, always made me nervous, just because I don't want to ever have that perception as their employees. I asked Microsoft how that worked out for them a few years ago, but beyond that, we begin to trust them and treat them, give them access like we do a regular employee, and maybe we shouldn't. We've got a large nationwide Fortune 500 client who had an issue about 5 years ago. Over this time of year, the Christmas break, they were doing some end-of-year payroll updates, and they had brought in through an agency a temp, basically to do data entry for them. After his assignment was done, a couple of weeks after his assignment was done, they got a phone call from a local police department. And that department said, hey, we stopped somebody for a motor vehicle violation, and they had some warrants and some other things, and we arrested them. But then we also noticed in the front seat of their car there was this huge printout of names and social security numbers and dates of birth and addresses for a whole bunch of people, and across the top it's got the name of your company on these printouts. Do you want to look at this? And of course they did want to look at that, and they realized that in fact those were company employees, former employees actually, hundreds of them. And their identity was probably in the process of being stolen, and this temp had access to their network, their payroll system, and we all know from WikiLeaks and the Snowden affair and all of that, just a USB plugged into a computer can carry away a ton of information. So just because they're temporary doesn't mean that you don't need to do your due diligence and know who you're bringing into the organization. Then there are the contingent staff, or the independent contractors, people who we bring in from the outside to do specific things. And most of my audience today, I think, is in human resources. And so how often in HR do you even know when your IT department brings in some contractors to do some work? I mean, they're paying for them through their own budget or through procurement or whomever. And how do you even know? Well, you probably, somebody in your organization needs to know, and there needs to be some level of due diligence. IT contractors are a great example because of the guy on the screen, Stephen Robertson. He worked for a company in Dallas, Texas, an architectural and engineering firm, as their IT administrator. When he left working there and went to work at another employer, he hacked into their network and left taunting messages to the person who took his place and all that. And so he's working for the second employer, which is Cinemark, the movie theater chain, and he gets arrested and prosecuted in Dallas County for illegally accessing the computer network. And his current employer, Cinemark, never becomes aware of it. And so what do you think happened when he left Cinemark a few years later? He did the same thing. He hacked into Cinemark's network and caused a lot of problems, wiped out their PeopleSoft database. You can imagine coming in on a Monday morning to do payroll, and here's PeopleSoft's gone. So he was prosecuted this time at the federal level and convicted, and he went to federal prison. Now, when you look him up on LinkedIn, you can just look for Stephen Robertson and Lawson, L-A-W-S-O-N. That's the software that he's apparently experienced in. He's a contractor, and he's got this long history of working for large, both government agencies and healthcare networks and other things like that as a contractor on his LinkedIn. It's right there on his LinkedIn. But I mean, this is somebody who's been convicted, who started deferred adjudication once and was convicted once for being a hacker and illegally accessing computer networks. And so, do you know who your contractors are? How much access is being given to them? Because quite honestly, your procurement department or your IT department, they're looking for somebody who can get a specific job done, get in, get out. But maybe what happens if they don't get out? What if they get in there and leave a back door that they can come back to later? So these independent contractors are a real problem, whether they're 1099 employees or they're some sort of company, they've got their own company set up, but they're coming to work on site for you. And then, especially in the healthcare area, it's not uncommon. I came out of healthcare, human resources, to have medical professionals, certified nurse, certified CRNA, certified registered nurse anesthesiologist are one example, where these are medical professionals. We see it with physical therapists too, things like that, where they work for a contracting agency. They don't work for the hospital, but they're there every day working alongside the rest of the hospital staff. They've got badges on. Maybe they've got a different color badge or a different color scrub or something that they wear, but looking at them, patients and most other employees don't even consider them to be anybody besides a hospital employee. And again, there are horror stories about folks out there who are were traveling nurses, or people like that who had some real issues in their past, and they could get jobs in healthcare because they were working as agency staff, or basically filling in, working extra shifts for other people, and doing temp type work. And again, there's a standard of care concern in the healthcare world that the patient should have the same standard of care regardless of who's providing it. And so it doesn't matter if that person's being paid by the hospital or by the contracting agency. It's the responsibility of the hospital to ensure that that same standard of care is met. And the only way you can do that is by applying the same standards for that position that you would for a regular employee. And if you look at that picture at the bottom, this is what happens with these agency staff, these long-term assignment temps. They become part of your workforce. Looking at this picture, you couldn't tell necessarily who was or wasn't not an employee of the company versus just a contractor. And so, I bring that up just to remind you that once everybody's guard is down, you think, oh, well, I'd never give that kind of information to a temp or to a contractor. Well, once they've been in your organization for a while, people know them and trust them just like they do other employees. And you should probably know who they are because you're giving them access to your employees, your customers, and your information and assets. And then there are straight contractors or their subcontractors. It's really common for companies to have outside vendors do their janitorial work, for instance. That's really common. We've had several issues with our clients and their use, or the buildings that they leave space in, even their use of contractors for janitorial, housekeeping type maintenance. We had a client call us, an oil company call us one Monday morning and say, hey, we've got a problem. Can you come in, because we do employment investigations? And they had opened their color copier over the weekend or on the Monday morning and found the remnants of some IDs, identification that had been cut up, and it was clear that somebody had been making fake IDs. Fortunately, they had left their own picture on that color copier, so that helped identify who it was, but it turned out it was part of their janitorial staff, and they've got access after hours, and they've got the run of the place, and most employers don't know who they are. And quite honestly, most of your property management folks, in our experience, really don't know who's coming in because they're being sent in by the low bidder janitorial service who's hiring whoever can come in and do it, and they don't. And those places, believe me, are not doing good background checks, but they're giving access to your offices and run of your space after hours to people who you don't know who they are. Then we also had another client, a large financial services firm that had a break-in over. They came in on Monday and found that some file cabinets had been jimmied open, some offices had office drawers and had been broken open and things like that across the office. And the first thing I asked there again was, who's your janitorial staff? We went and talked to the building management, and they contracted it all to this company, and in fact hadn't even done the due diligence on the company. The company didn't legally exist. It wasn't a corporate entity or anything like that. It was just a mom and pop thing that had a DBA down at the local courthouse. And we contacted them, and they were all foreign nationals. And we called them, started talking to them. They didn't know exactly who was working that weekend. We got real iffy as to whether we could even find any, talk to those people who were there over the weekend. Some of them had quit, that kind of stuff, and ultimately the police got involved, and none of that was ever resolved to the satisfaction of that employer. So again, think about in your organization, these are folks that nobody even gives a second glance to, but they're walking. They've got keys to everything, and they've got access. And also your IT folks, off-site IT. If you've got off-site technical support that you use in your company to maintain your networks and make sure your employees have everything that they need computer-wise, and maybe they'll come on site and do some work and go off, but a lot of it's provided off-site, and they remote into your network. They've got usernames and passwords to log into your networks and stuff. Who are those people? Do they have access? Do you know who they are? Have they met your criteria for who you want to give access to your network? And do you even know that their companies are doing good background checks? So we'll talk about those kinds of things. So why does any of this matter? Why are we really concerned about it? I've given you a few anecdotes, but obviously we've got a responsibility to protect our employees. Under the general duty clause, we need to make sure our employees have a safe place to work. But beyond OSHA, we just want to make sure that we have a safe and productive place where people can come to work and not have to fear for any kind of concerns for themselves or their property. We also have a duty as employers to protect the public from putting the wrong people in the wrong jobs where those may cause some sort of risk to the public. And of course, we've got assets that we need to protect, and the company, needs to make sure the biggest source of internal, of loss of things that walk out the door without being paid for is our employees, not shoplifters or vendor fraud or anything like that. It's simply folks who work for you and who take advantage of you. But ultimately, it all boils down to your company's reputation. Whatever happens, if your company's in the news for something, or you have a customer who's upset about something, it doesn't matter that it was a temp employee, a contingent worker, whatever you want to call them, contractor that did this. It's always going to be the negative impact is always going to be on your company's reputation. Everybody will remember that you're the company where that thing happened, and you allowed that to happen, is what they would often say. So this stuff does matter, just like doing your due diligence in the employment context would. So does the FCRA apply, the Fair Credit Reporting Act? We've got a whole webinar just on the FCRA, so I'm just going to hit the high points, but yes, it does apply. First, the FCRA, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, should really probably be called the Fair Consumer Reporting Act. Ignore the word credit, because even if you're not ordering credit on any of these people, it's probably still going to be a consumer report under the law, and it's also going to be for an employment purpose. If you order information from a third party about someone that you're going to use in making an employment decision, that's a consumer report under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And under the FCRA, that means you've got certain responsibilities as the employer. And the Federal Trade Commission has defined this very broadly. And so they include employment purposes, including looking at contractors or 1099 employees or agents, and even volunteers. So the safe bet is to go ahead and regardless of whether you agree with them on all those, and I don't really agree with them on volunteers for sure, but the safe bet is to go ahead and make sure that when you're running a report, or when you're having your vendors run reports on their employees, that the Fair Credit Reporting Act is being followed. And primarily from the employer point of view, that means that first, before you order the report, you obtain you disclose to them that you're going to procure a consumer report, and then you obtain their consent and authorization to do that. There are as many forms out there as there are employers. This is kind of what ours looks like, but you want to make sure that you've got their signed authorization, and that you're disclosing to them that you're going to procure a consumer report on them. We've got a whole webinar, like I said, called 5 Easy Steps to Avoiding Background Check Litigation, and it really just hammers on the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And so if you need to get deeper into it, do go look at that webinar. It's recorded on our website. And then after you get the report back, if there's something on the background check or the information that you received that may cause you to take an adverse action, not hire them, consider them for a different position, and when we're talking about contingent staff, contingent workers, contractors, things like that, that would mean not placing them, not allowing them to be placed in your organization. If, as the employer, you're ordering the background check and you're making this decision about whether they can come on site or not, then probably the smart thing is to do is go ahead and treat that like an adverse action under the FCRA, and that means you give them a copy of their report and a copy of their rights under the law. It's real simple. It's something that you can do easily. But you just want to make sure you make sure it's done. Either you or your vendor is doing that, and that's before you take the adverse action. So they should be able to see their report, make sure everything is accurate before you put that decision in place, before you decide not to hire them and hire somebody else, for instance. And then after you've taken the adverse action, you've got to give them another notice, and that notice tells them that you've taken this action how to contact the background screening company, the consumer reporting agency in the parlance of the FCRA. A statement that the FCRA, that the consumer reporting agency didn't make the hiring decision, and notice of their rights under the law to obtain additional copies of the information from the consumer reporting agency. Really specific stuff. Your background screening company probably gives this to you automatically on their online web portal, but you just want to make sure that even when you're dealing with contractors, that this is getting done. So what is a background check? Because when we're talking about contractors, obviously we're often thinking about criminal history, but there are other areas that are equally important. Certainly driving records. If somebody's going to be operating either a motor vehicle or some sort of dangerous heavy equipment, their driving history may give you some idea of their safety awareness. And certainly you've got a right as an employer to know that, to know who this agency is sending into your organization. And so if they're not going to operate safely, you should know about that. It's also a great way to verify quickly that the name and date of birth and address maybe that they provided you matches that on the state's records, so that it's just a little piece of identity verification as they walk in the door. And we see so much fraud, and so many employers aren't verifying education and employment claims, and especially if the job requires certain skill levels or experience levels. If you're bringing in a contractor who's supposed to have a certain level of experience, go ahead and verify that. Verify, or make sure that somebody that you trust has verified that. Either you do it in-house or you have some agreement with your vendor, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, where they do that on your back, to make sure that they do it before they send somebody to you. But we see a lot of fraud. People claiming degrees they don't have, people claiming employment experience they don't have. So you want to make sure that you're catching those things in your process. Now, credit is a little different situation. You want to make sure that if you've got a regulatory or legal requirement to run credit, and there are some financial services and other situations where that may be required for a specific position. If you're bringing in a temporary or some sort of contract person, you may have the obligation under the law or the regulations that govern you to do a credit report on them. Now, what I'm constantly talking employers, talking my own clients out of running credit, because quite honestly, I don't think credit tells you the story you think it does. It really doesn't tell you anything about their reliability or their honesty or their propensity for theft or anything like that. In fact, the few studies that are out there say there's no correlation that somebody with negative credit history is no more likely to be in any kind of progressive discipline or to terminate voluntarily or involuntarily than somebody with a more positive credit history. So in most cases, unless they're managing accounts or they've got access to really sensitive company information, I would recommend you not run credit at all for all positions. But if your standard is that nobody gets into this role in our organization without us reviewing their credit report, then you probably want to make sure that you've considered at least, if we're bringing in a contractor, even a fractional CFO or something like that, then we want to make sure we're looking at the same kind of information on those people as well. And then there's personal and professional references. Often these are not much more than an intelligence test. Is this person going to say nice, can this person list 3 people who'll say nice things about them? But beyond that, there are some regulatory positions that require that personal references or professional references be checked. And so if you're staffing for those kind of positions and you're bringing in a contractor to help you get the work done, then you probably want to make sure that you've met those requirements, either by doing it yourself or having someone else, either the agency sending someone to you, the vendor, or your background screening company, make those verification calls and those reference calls for you. So now let's talk about criminal real quick. We do tons of criminal record research, and we ran some numbers earlier this year and found that about 95% of the criminal records that we report to our clients come directly out of the county criminal records where the person's lived, worked, or attended school, and typically in the last 10 years is typically how far back we go for our clients. So that 95% of those criminal records are, you know, a pretty big slice of all the available records that you might see. The problem is that most of your vendors, especially your temp and staffing agencies, what they're doing is running an instant national criminal records database, which means that you're only going to, those databases, those instant over the internet databases that you get back right away, those are going to miss about half of the records. And that's a good database. That's our experience. We've tested almost all of the databases. We run a database on every report we do. So I'm not against databases, but they've got an appropriate use. But if your vendor, and a lot of staffing agencies especially, are spending about $2.50 on their database background checks on people they're sending into your organization. So for that much money, you're not getting very much, you know, good information. And so you're going to miss about half of the records. And so, and then, you know, but, you know, we always advise people, our clients, to look at the records in all the places where they've lived, worked, attended school in at least the last 10 years. And again, it gives us about 95% of the records out of the, you know, most of these records are sourced out of the county courthouses. Then if you want to add the state criminal record repositories and sex offender databases and prison records even, we identify about 3% additional records using those tools. And then we'll also find, when we search federal courts, about 2% of the records we report to our clients come out of federal searches. And so maybe interstate drug crimes, interstate gun crimes, things like that, bank robbery, some kinds of insurance fraud and arson, things like that, all often show up in federal courts. And most of the time when there's a federal case, there's not going to be an underlying county case related to this person. That's something that I hear a lot out there. Well, if they've got a federal case, there's also going to be some related charges at the county level. We found that's often not the case, that these federal cases are standalone and cases aren't brought or filed even at the county level if the Fed's taken the case. And so, but it's a small percentage, and that's a lot more effort to search those federal cases because of the way the courts are set up. But your best money is still spent at that county criminal level. And that's what almost all of our clients are doing. So if your agencies are just relying on those national, so-called national databases, we wouldn't even call ours a national database because that oversells its value. We call it a multi-jurisdictional database. But you know, if that's what they're doing, that they're missing about half the records. And I get why they run that. They're not going to spend, you know, like our entry-level really good background check runs about $85. And, you know, I can see why a temp staffing agency is not going to run an $85 background check on the, you know, all the temps who walk in the door, all the people who walk in the door to apply for them, or who they even put on assignment for, you know, half a day here or a day here. It wouldn't be cost effective. But use the contracting organization, the people who, you know, the employer, you care, and so you probably need to be sure, especially for positions where there's not a lot of supervision or where they're going to be longer term, that you do get a better background check. So what can you ask? Well, it goes back to exactly the same issue that you have with your regular employees. What can you legally ask of your employees under the states in which you operate and even local ordinances under which you operate? So this is our standard criminal history question for Texas, and for most states it's pretty easy. But this is one for our you know, primarily for our healthcare clients. But what you'll find is your staffing agencies, if they even ask about criminal history, they're not asking a very good question. So we'll talk about this in a little bit, but you want to make sure that your criminal history question, the one that you use in selecting your own employees, make sure that same question is getting asked either by you or by your staffing agency, your contracting agency, contractor, to make sure that you're getting all the information that you want. between, because really, why should you spend the money on a background check if the applicant's going to tell you right up front something that would probably disqualify them from being placed in your organization? And we've got a whole webinar called Outside of the Box that talks about the state-by-state requirements and the municipality-by-municipality requirements, how to construct a criminal history inquiry that's legal and doesn't get you in trouble. And it's a constantly moving target as well, because there's always a new ordinance coming up. So we're spending a lot of time and effort staying on top of that for our clients. But at the same time, you want to make sure that where you're operating, you can look at that and make sure it's legit. And then we include in our criminal history inquiry an opportunity for the applicant, or in your case, in this, what we're talking about today, the contingent staff person, the individual, to provide information additional to the basic information about their criminal offense history. That kind of meets the EEOC's expectation that you give these individuals an opportunity to conduct an individualized assessment, basically an opportunity for the individual to tell you why your policy shouldn't apply to them. So you've got a policy that says, if you've had a sexual assault in the last 7 years, you can't work in this wing of our hospital, or you've had you've got a conviction for auto theft 3 years ago, you can't work on our car dealership. That's just, it's a no-brainer. But if you've got those policies, the EEOC really still wants you to give those applicants an opportunity to explain whatever it is that they can say that may mitigate some of the information. And there's a whole list of things. We've got a webinar called Policy Considerations to Avoid Discrimination Claims. That I would really consider, if you're looking at any of this stuff for your own employees or for contingent staff, I'd suggest you go look at and dig into, because it goes pretty deep into some of the things. And then we've also got a webinar called Creating a Criminal History Evaluation Tool that goes through the process of creating the tools that you would use to evaluate criminal history. And we'll get into those a little deeper in a minute. And why does this all matter? Well, because the EEOC is paying a lot of attention to it, and BMW just last month entered into a $1.6 million settlement with the EEOC on a class action lawsuit. The EEOC had claimed in the lawsuit that BMW's use of background checks in hiring, now listen to this, contract workers, or allowing their contractor to have certain workers on site, violated Title VII because of their EEOC maintained that their use of criminal history was overly broad. So what does that mean for you? Well, the idea is that what you're including in your criteria to evaluate whether they're contractors, the employees of someone else altogether, or just temporary employees that you hire direct, or your regular employees, you need to have good criteria. In the BMW case, and the EEOC has lost almost all of these cases that they've brought, okay? In the BMW case, they're calling it a win, but quite honestly, the BMW made some pretty interesting concessions, and the facts of the case, as they were presented in court documents, didn't sound real good for BMW. Basically, what happened in the BMW case was BMW had a contractor that provided logistics services in their plant. These are basically people who pick up stuff and carry them from one place to the other and make sure things are stocked and things like that. And they had a company that did that. They awarded the contract for that business to a different company, okay? And when they did, BMW said, and we tell this new company, we want you to follow our guidelines for using criminal history. And they had some policies in place that said you can't work for us if you've got these kind of criminal histories. And the problem was the new company, the new contracting company, said, okay, we'll do that. And of course, what they did is what you've probably seen in your organization. When contractors change out, they just hire the same employees that were working there before, that now they're just reporting to a different company, but they're still reporting to the same job site doing the same job. Well, they ended up having to let go, I think, 69 employees, if I remember right, and the new contracting agency, 69 people who had been doing that job. Some of them had been doing that job for over a decade, but they had, successfully, but they had this criminal history, and so now BMW's new policy was not allowing this contractor to send them on site, and they terminated them. Well, somebody went to the EOC, and the EOC sued, and ultimately BMW again settled for $1.6 million. By the way, everybody who's on the call today who are registered will get an email later today with slides, and all the slides have a lot of notes about everything I'm talking about. So hopefully that'll be something that's helpful to you. And please keep putting your questions in the question box. I will answer them all. I'll stick around as long as we need to afterwards, if that's necessary, to make sure we answer all the questions. So what do you do with this information? How do you review criminal history? Well, again, much like you would for your own employees, what we do when we're working with clients is help them use our tools to develop a criminal history matrix that identifies certain offenses in certain periods of time as low risk, medium risk, or high risk for a specific position based on the risks associated with that particular position, what kind of access they have, what the safety awareness for the position needs to be, those kinds of things, who they interact with. We've got a whole chart of those kinds of things. So if our clients can say, okay, this person's an accounting clerk, they've got access to accounts, they've got access to networks, so these are the kind of concerns we have, versus this other person who works in the warehouse and drives a forklift, has access to merchandise, and things like that, and maybe we've had drug problems in the past in our warehouse, and we need to make sure we keep drugs out of the workplace, and we've had some issues out there. So maybe that's one of the concerns. So you kind of go through those things and you come up with a matrix, and it looks something like this. And you can see these things are all categorized by high, medium, or low risk. And so let's say this is a car dealership, and you see auto theft there, high risk, it's, H, and that's the first block would be, say, 0 to 3 years, and second block might be 3 to 7 years ago, and then the third block would be 7 or more. And so you've probably got a policy that says, generally auto theft at our car dealership, we're not going to hire somebody as a auto salesman who's had a conviction for auto theft in the last 7 years, barring some other factors that they present that would cause us to change our mind. But more than 7 years ago, yeah, we're going to look at the details and understand what happened. You see down here, alcohol consumption and possession offenses. Those are all marked as L's, low risk. Yeah, it may be that you may not be able to hire in some places a car salesman who didn't have some problem with alcohol at some point. So maybe those are all low risk, and so you're not really concerned about that. No, we're not talking about DWI. That's a different offense altogether. But and then you see computer crimes. Yeah, if they've been convicted of a computer crime, that's a high risk. We're going to really look at that carefully before we put somebody, because these people have access. Computer crimes often have to do with access to, gaining access to proprietary or personal information that's been secured on some computer network. So we're going to be kind of concerned about somebody working in our car dealership as a salesman or in finance. If they've had some computer crimes, we're going to really dig deep into those computer crimes to understand what happened. And even if it's more than 3 years ago or 7 years ago, we're still going to want to understand what happened. So we're going to mark those as medium risk. So you get this kind of tool together, and for your regular employees, it makes it real easy, if you've got a good criminal history inquiry up front, to say, you know what, we're not going to, we've got better candidates than this person. But also for your contractors who are coming on site, why would you let someone have access to your computer network if they've got some criminal history, offense history, that would preclude them from being employed by you in the same role? So, all of this to say, having a good process in place, a good policy in place, makes it easy to apply equally to employees and contractors. And some people tell me from, well, if we applied that to all our temp, our policies to all our temp employees, we would never be able to get a temp on site. Well, and if that's the case, you need to look at either your policies or your controls, because it may be that your policies are too stiff and that you're eliminating too many people, or you need to put more controls in place so that you can lower your policies and maybe take a little bit more risk in about who comes in the door with certain kinds of offenses, because you've got other controls in place to prevent them from doing you or your customers or your other employees any harm. So, what comes up from time to time is, hey, well, the agency or contractor, they already told me they do a background check. Isn't that enough? Well, maybe it is, but you really need to understand what's in their background check. And we have clients who have call centers and things like that, and they're handling a lot of personally identifiable information for their clients, for their clients' customers, things like that. And they get these requirements from their very large insurance company clients, healthcare company clients, and they say you've got to conduct a background check this way. Often the guidelines they give them are not very specific and not very not as directive as I would like when I'm helping my clients put together their guidelines for such a thing. But what the real question is, when they say, yeah, we did a background check, what does that mean? When they say they did a criminal background check, is it just a database, or are they searching the counties where the people have lived? If your standard is to include federal criminal searches, are they doing those? How aligned is what they're doing to what you're doing? And one way to kind of do that is, if you're doing a good criminal background check process, is just say, well, what do you pay for them? And if they tell you, we pay $3 for our background checks, or even $20 for our background checks, that's probably a good red flag for you that they're probably not doing to the standard that you are. And are they verifying credentials, education, things like that? Are they verifying all that stuff before they send them on site for you? Or are they just looking at their resume and say, oh yeah, he says he's got an MBA, or he's got this, Microsoft certification, or whatever it is, and just moving on? Are they verifying that, and are they going to meet the criteria that you would have for the same position if you were sending someone, if you were hiring someone into the position? So, who runs that background check? And now, this is probably why most of you are on the call today. You've got 3 different options here, really. I've seen different flavors of each one, but basically either the vendor does the background check. Well, there's always the 4th one where nobody's doing the background check, which I don't recommend. But the vendor's doing their own background check, their own process, or the vendor's using the contracting organization's process, your process, or you're doing the background check yourself. So let's look at each of those real quick. The first option there, the vendor's using their own process, and basically, hopefully you've given them criteria saying, here's what we want you to do. Here's what our standard is for putting somebody in this kind of position, whether it's an administrative clerical position or a driver position or whatever. And we want to make sure, we want you to make sure that you're verifying, their driving record, that you're verifying that their driver's license is valid, that they're insured, that that you're doing a criminal background check on them. Or maybe it's some professional position and you want to verify. You want to make sure that they verified that they've got the degree they've claimed, or that they've got that their work history checks out. Those kinds of things. So you provide the guidelines to the vendor, then the vendor goes and does it. The pros of that is it's a lot more administratively simpler for both the vendor and for the contracting organization, for you to do that, and it causes less confusion for the individual, because if I'm going to XYZ staffing to get a job as a programmer or whatever, get an assignment, and now I've done a background check for XYZ staffing, but now this place where they want to send me also has got a different set of criteria and a different background check form. It does get kind of confusing, because people do hate to put their social security number down on multiple documents, and people get queasy when you say you're going to run a background check. So this is a little simpler if the vendor just does the same process that you're doing. Problem is that the vendor may not understand your expectations or their screening process may simply not match the quality of what you're using. We have seen, when I was in healthcare, we'd hire somebody, our agency nurses and people like that, and they would say, you know, they would have been cleared, the background check was good according to the agency that sent them, and then when we went to hire them, we couldn't hire them because of something, whether their credentials weren't right, or were not valid, had expired, whatever, or they had some criminal history or some negative work history that we wouldn't have allowed them in our organization. But now they've been working in our organization for some period of time, and we've got to say, well, you know, either you lied on the application or, you know, whatever, but you're not we can't let you work here because you don't meet the qualifications for this job. So that's what will happen on occasion, and avoiding that is what a lot of our clients call us about. They're like, how do we do this without getting in trouble, but not having this problem down the line where after we've spent all the money having somebody on attempt to hire for 3 months or more, and we've spent all the time training them and up to speed, we've decided to keep them, then we run the background and they're just simply not eligible for hire. How do we avoid that? And so we'll talk about those other processes. But if you're going to do this process, first you want to make sure that that your vendor has a really good application process in place that has a good criminal history inquiry and captures their other relevant experience, other relevant information like their experience or education, things like that. And really, if the vendor hasn't run the background check, before they order the background check, they ought to share all that information with you, with the applicant's or their employee's permission, the individual's permission. They ought to share all that with you, and you can look at that first rather than waiting for that background check. Because if they've given you enough information in their initial process, and it's more than just a resume, which is just a polite lie, then you can make those, you can make some initial decisions. If the person's telling you the truth, and if they've put all the applicable information down, then you shouldn't have any problem hiring them after the background check's back. But you should, if you're going to do this process, provide pretty detailed guidelines as to what you expect the vendor's background check to include, and it should pretty much mirror what you do in your organization already. You should probably consider including how recently their check has to have been performed. So if they hired this person 3 years ago and they've worked at 5 different companies over the last 3 years, and they haven't done any new background check on them since then, do you want a more recent background check performed on them? Probably. They should certify back to you that those guidelines that you've given them, that they're going to follow them and comply with them. And in this case, you also want the vendor to certify that they agree that they're responsible for the Fair Credit Reporting Act compliance. They're responsible for making sure that they've disclosed to the individual that they're going to procure the background check and receive their written authorization. And if there's anything negative there, they'll follow the FCRA's pre-adverse and post-adverse notices we talked about earlier. And then I would really recommend that before they bring somebody on, you see that report. They should get the permission of the applicant to share that report with you. And that's perfectly legal with the consent of that applicant. It's a business necessity. And so they look at that. Then you can look at that and you can evaluate it and make sure it meets your criteria. And then you can make the decision as to whether you hire them or not. Because so many of these hiring decisions are not black and white. Because you'll look at their criminal history and look at their subsequent employment history. You'll want to look at their experience and their qualifications and evaluate all of that, including any individualized assessment information they gave you. You'll want to put that through your own process, however your organization reviews that kind of individualized assessment stuff. So you want to look at all of that and make a decision rather than just giving. What you don't want to do, I don't think, anymore with all these EEOC claims out there and just the way that criminal history is being scrutinized by governmental entities and plaintiffs' lawyers, you just do not, and I've never liked them, but you don't want a black and white policy that says, if you've got this criminal history, we can't hire you, period. That's just, probably in many cases overly broad, and unless the criminal records offenses are pretty recent, you're going to exclude people that you would otherwise, if you knew the full story, would want to hire. And then if you don't hire somebody or you don't allow the vendor to place somebody in your organization, then you want to make sure that that vendor is going to follow the Fair Credit Reporting Act's pre-adverse and post-adverse action requirements. So that question comes up: do they have to? If we're just not letting them send them on site. That's not really employment. We're not employing them, but you want to make sure everybody, when somebody gets sued, everybody gets sued. And so, what you really want to make sure you do is, if there's any doubt whether this is an FCRA in a situation, whether this is an adverse employment decision, from the point of view of the individual who's not getting placed at your wonderful company, that would be an adverse situation, especially after he talked to an employment law plaintiff's attorney and who explained to him, hey, you've got a cause of action here, and if you feel like that was an adverse decision, well, sure it was, and that person was trying to get an assignment from the XYZ staffing company, and XYZ staffing company was willing to send them to you, and then you declined to hire them, and so now they're not working, or you declined to have them on site, so now they're not working. So that would be adverse. It's affecting the money in my pocket. So XYZ in this case should give them a copy of the report and their rights, and then give them a chance to review that, and then give them the second notice after they've made the decision, or after you've made the decision they can't come on site. So there's always risk here of being considered a co-employer, okay? So just understand that. Anytime you've got a temporary staff on site or contractors on site, you want to minimize that as much as possible, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but at the same time, you've got to recognize that's just, if your model is to have temporaries or contractors on site, there's a good chance that you're going to be considered a co-employer. So you want to make sure that everybody who may be a co-employer with you is doing what they're supposed to do, and that these individuals' rights are being protected. So let's look at the second option. The vendor is using the contracting organization's process. Basically what we're saying here is you tell the vendor that we want you to use the exact same process, including the same background screening partner we use for background checks. And we want you to, when you're hiring somebody for this position, we want you to use the exact same background check that we order from the same vendor. That is great. It's really hard to convince those vendors to do it unless you just use a lot of agency staff. And that's what's happened with some of our clients who have just a ton of, at any given time, mostly labor type positions at any given time. And a lot of healthcare organizations require that those agencies have the same, those agencies that are sending people into their organizations have the exact same background screening vendor, and that they order the same reports that the contracting organization would use. And that way, it's being done the same way, the quality is consistent, it ensures that consistent standard of care. And in this situation, the vendor is still paying for the background check usually, although they're probably going to jack up your rates a little bit on the other end to make up for it. The cons, the downside from the vendor point of view is that they may end up with multiple screening relationships, and I can see where that's a hassle. If they're working for 6 different companies, and those 6 different companies each have a different background screening company, they have to have all those to manage. And they also balk at the cost of doing a more thorough background check than they normally do. But in this process, and again, all these are bullet points in the notes that you'll look at, the big thing you want to have there is that clear understanding between you and the background screening company and the vendor of what's expected. And so your background screening company should be certifying to you, yeah, this is the report that was run on that person. Then the vendor, with the authorization of the individual on whom the report was run, should be giving you still that copy of report. But when you see it, this looks just like the reports we get. It's got the same content, and it's done by the same company, so the quality is going to be the same. A lot of those other things we talked about earlier are pretty much the same, but just making sure that the vendor is running the same background check you are helps a lot. And then the third option, and we see this mostly with temp to hire positions or long-term assignments, where the company says, you know what, the contracting organization just says, we're going to run the background check on the vendor ourselves. We also see this with very security conscious organizations. They don't want anybody. They don't care if it's a plumber. They don't want them in our organization unless they've passed our standards of background checks, and we're just going to run the background check. And so we'll have preferred vendors, we'll have preferred relationships, but we're going to do the background check on everybody ourselves. This really ensures that standard of care, and it does avoid those cost increases by the vendor who's trying to upsell or upcharge you for those background checks. Now, the downside is that the contracting organization is going to end up paying for those background checks. And depending on how soon you get the information versus how soon you need them to start, it could delay a day or two their start date, or put you in a position where you bring them in contingent on the background check and all their assertions to you up to that point having been verified. But if, again, the background check should just be a lie detector test. You should have asked every question that you care about up front, so that if they lied to you, they get caught on the background check. It doesn't hurt your feelings to fire them because they lied. But if and then if they told you the truth, you got no problems. One thing that comes up a lot is, okay, we run the background check on the contractor, and now we're not going to allow this individual to come on site and work alongside our people or work in our environment. What do I tell that agency that we just had working for, that tried to send this person to us and we said no? What do we tell them that? Well, you've got a couple options. With certainly with the applicant's permission, you can share that directly. And to be honest, whether the applicant's permission is really required or not is probably a question for debate, because again, it's a business necessity issue. But why not just up front get their authorization, just like the contracting organization was getting their authorization to share the information with you. When you do it, say, hey, when you sign this authorization, you're not going to have a problem if everything you told us on the application was correct, or on the documents we gave you, the security questionnaire and the skills assessment forms, or whatever it was that you gave them for the application-ish stuff. As long as all that's true, you're not going to have a problem. But if anything comes back that we're not expecting, you may have a problem. We still want you to give us authorization right now to share that information with your current employer. Do that. That works fine. And but some employers get kind of squeamish about that. But then if you don't do it, then you're going to be in a position where, okay, you're sending this individual back to the agency and saying, hey, you can't send them here. And what may happen is they just take that person off their list altogether. And although the person may not be appropriate for your environment, that doesn't mean they couldn't work in a dozen other environments. But if the agency doesn't know exactly why you didn't, what the reason was that the background check kept them from coming to work for you, it could, have a bigger negative impact on that individual. So, our recommendation is just, I love transparency. Everybody knows what's going on. Let's make all our disclosures. Tell everybody, hey, here's what we're going to do. You're going to authorize us to share this with them, and you go that route. When you write your authorization documents, though, the disclosure and authorization documents for the background check, and also any inquiries you make about their criminal history or about their skills and experience and all, whatever your skills assessment document looks like, you want to minimize any suggestion in there that you're creating an employment relationship with this person. So don't give them the standard FCRA authorization and consent document or disclosure and authorization document that says, in connection with your employment with our company, we may run a background check. Don't, what you say, you edit that language so that it says, in connection with your assignment or your appointment to a contracts position or whatever at our facility, we need to do a background check on you. And word it that way so that it's clear that you're not creating an employment relationship with this person. And there are a lot more notes here, but we are out of time. So I'm going to answer any questions you may have. Thank you all for joining us today. Let me open these questions here. Can you run a background check on someone before you actually interview them? Well, Matt, it depends on where you are. Normally, yeah, sure. In the majority of the country, yes, you can. However, There are a number of states and municipalities that have embraced the ban the box movement, and basically what they're saying is that in those places you cannot ask about criminal history until after an interview, or in some cases you can't ask about criminal history or order the background check until after you've made an offer. And so how does that play out in the contingent workforce or the contractor environment? What I would say, just to be safe in those environments, if the law or those ordinances didn't directly address it, what I would say is you want to go ahead through your whole process, and then at the point where you're really ready to accept this person, there's no other qualification process. You've interviewed the person, at the very least, done a telephone interview or perhaps an in-person interview. You communicate to the contract or to the vendor that, yeah, we're ready to bring this person on board. You can go ahead and schedule them, send them over, but we're not going to. But that's all contingent on the background check coming back. And that way, that's as close to making an offer of employment in this context that you can get, is where you tell the agency to go ahead and send somebody over. So, and in some places they do require you to do that. Wait until after an offer's been made. Others are after an interview. Some places after an interview's been scheduled, and other places after an interview's been conducted. So you can see on a city-by-city basis, it's getting interesting. Do any background checks identify concealed carry permits, as we have employers concerned with open carry? No. Well, depends on where you're at. If you're in Texas, Bobby, they used to publish the list of people who have concealed carry permits. They've since sealed that, so you can't see. If I'm correct, I believe I am, that you can't see, and I think in most states, the people who have concealed carry permits or open carry, as in Texas as of January 1st, permits will be sealed, so you won't know that. And really, quite honestly, that would be, I would tell an employer that they're looking at it all wrong. Just somebody who's, whether they've got a concealed carry permit or even an open carry permit, that's probably not relevant to the risk. I would say there's probably no data out there that suggests that people with those permits pose any greater risk than the general public. They do have to go through some training, and they do have to have a background check done by the state. It's not a very good background check, but it's a background check by the state. So I would tell our client, I would tell any client who called me about that, if you're really concerned about open carry or concealed carry, there are, in whatever state you're in, there are regulations about sign postings and things like that that you can do to keep people from carrying on your facility. Just go ahead and do that for everybody. And then if somebody is violating your company policy and that says you can't carry here, well, and certainly if they are, you just have that agreement with them. Anybody who's walking into the organization as a contractor, you just put that in whatever information you give them about your site security rules. No one is allowed to carry a weapon in our facility, period. That'll satisfy it. You've communicated it to them, and they can't carry. So I would go with something like that. If there aren't any questions, I'll end it. I expected more questions on this. Either I put everybody to sleep or I answered them. But I think I get a lot of calls and questions about this stuff, but a lot of it is exactly what you would do for your regular employees, just modifying it a little bit to make sure that you're not creating that employment relationship, and quite honestly, that you're not spending a lot of money that you don't have to on, what you would do for a temp who's on site for 4 hours today is very different than what you're going to do for that temporary employee who's going to be here for 6 weeks, as finishing out your ACA reporting stuff. Those are going to be two very different levels of. You are going to have to modify whatever you do, for the kind of investment, the amount of supervision that person's going to have, and the kind of access they're going to have. So if that's it, we will end this. Everybody can look forward to getting an email later today with a link to download the slides and to get the HRCI and SHRM PDC recertification and PDC credit information. You should get that by the end of the day. If you don't, check your spam filter. And if you don't have it by tomorrow morning, send me an email. To get that stuff, the downloads and the credit information, We just ask that you complete our real quick survey, just telling me how I did, especially on this webinar. I really appreciate it because this is the first time we've ever done this presentation this way. And so if you've got any feedback, I would greatly appreciate it because I want to make sure that I'm telling you what you need to know. Thanks a lot. And finally, I want to be your background screening partner. A lot of you are my clients, and I appreciate that so much. But if you're not my background, if you're not our partner, if we're not working with you, we're the worst sales organization in the world. I'm not going to call and pester you, but I would love to work with you. If you're not getting what you need right now, or you're not even sure what you're getting, call me. I will spend as much time as we need going through your current process, helping you understand what you're buying and how we may or may not be able to help you. We may not be the right fit for you. I mean, if you're looking for, and I'll tell you, if you're looking for a $25, $30 background check, we're probably not the best fit for you. But you know, we help a lot of employers improve what they're doing and make better hires. So if I can be of service, please don't hesitate to give me a call. Thanks a lot.